Okay. We are in about a third of the way down in chapter 15. In the previous three chapters, 12 through 14, the Alter Rebbe laid out what, in fact, is this thing that we call Beinoni, which is the whole centerpiece of Tanya. Tanya is about the Beinoni. And unlike the common perception that a Beinoni, he's a nice guy, he's a good guy, he's an average guy, he's not evil, he's not perfect, the Alter Rebbe has rearranged our thinking about that. Two, as we might summarize it, the Beinoni acts, and when I say acts, I mean his conscious thought, his spoken word, and his deed, like the tzaddik, and he struggles internally with the temptations that are similar to the Russia. And he wins every time. So he has compliance. He struggles with alliance. Is he fully aligned with Hashem? No, he likes to do what he likes. He likes to do other things, but he complies with Hashem. So he has compliance, and we're striving for alliance. And in the previous chapter, the Alter Rebbe gave us some strategies to not only overcome our temptation, but to numb our temptation, to minimize our temptation, to make those things that we think are irresistible feel repulsive and disgusting in our eyes, rather than be in pursuit of them. And that was a pretty tall task. Well, in this chapter, the Alter Rebbe introduces a kind of even taller task. It's all based on a pasuk in the book of Malachi that reads, I have returned and I have seen between the righteous and the wicked, tzaddik and Russia, terms we're familiar with, between those who serve God and those who serve him not. Now, the Talmud, so again, the Talmud's perspective is a narrative perspective. It asks the question that seems to be rather obvious. Isn't this simply a redundancy? Isn't the tzaddik the one who serves God and the Rasha the one who doesn't serve God? And the answer is no, that is not necessarily the case, meaning a person can be a tzaddik but not be in service, or as we might say in English, transformative service. The classic illustration of this word avoida, which again we're translating here as service, is like turning a raw cowhide into the soft leather that we make shoes or belts from. Now, if you look at a small sapling, it's going to grow into being a tree. Now, isn't it true that all kinds of things could happen? Yes, of course. Isn't it true that sometimes it gets squashed? Yes, it's true. Generally, I call it's like the escalator. You're here, you're going to wind up there. And it goes. That's not avoida. Avoida is unimaginable transformation, or as I like to call it, our mission is to outpace the inevitable, to produce more than simply what we are on the trajectory to do. So, a very simple example. If a person has money and they put it in the bank and they can get, I don't know, whatever it is, 2% interest. Well, if somebody comes along and says, hey, I have a business venture, and like all businesses, it includes risk, and you might lose it. Well, what could I make? Well, you could make 2%. Well, why would I invest it in something risky like that when I can have it into something secure like the bank? Now, I'm not here to give financial advice. I'm just using this as a very rough analogy. So why would I risk potentially losing the money? Not so I can make 2%. That is, again, what I'm describing as inevitable. I'm willing to risk the money because I might pick a number, 5%, 8%, 20%. That's why I'm willing to risk it. Well, in a sense, that's what Hashem does with the neshama. So if Hashem keeps the neshama up in Shemayim, it will never break. It will never get dirty. It will never be vulnerable to, or whatever, not susceptible, but suscepted, or whatever the word is, to bad. It will be safe, but it will not grow. It may grow just, again, on the inevitable. So Hashem invests this neshama. He puts it down into this world where it could go backwards. It could lose. The neshama could be damaged. It could be stained. Why? Not for the hopes of making 2%, but for the hopes of making a significant profit that makes it worth this investment. Well, how much is the growth? Well, you recall from the Gemara that the analogy is that people commonly in Talmud times, in order to sustain the oral transmission, studied every idea 100 times. That was the standard. How much more do you have to study in order to be considered one who is serving Hashem? 101 times, just 1%. If you could study 1% more, you have already, again, outpaced the inevitable. Even though 100 is a great number, that's fantastic. But when that becomes the standard, we have to now go beyond the standard. Then the Talmud gave an example about the donkey drivers. The rule of thumb was for the donkey driver to drive you 10 distances, 10 parsangs, whatever it is, it cost 1 coin. To go 11 parsangs, that is 10% more, it was 2 coins. It was 100% more of the consequence. 10% more effort, 100% more um, value. Let's fly. Okay, so the Alter Rebbe explains that the word Eved, which is a server of Hashem, is distinct from the word Oved, one who is engaged in the service, that endless growth. Now, again, on the one hand, this seems overwhelmingly demanding because our animal soul, its greatest aspiration is to do nothing, even if that doing nothing means doing what I've always been doing. And again, say, yeah, but look where I came from. Well, there's a truth to that, except at a certain point that runs out. So, of course, as an infant takes their first step, or they first learn how to write their name, or read, or sew, or drive, or type, or whatever it is, it's very, very impressive. But at a certain point, it's not that impressive anymore. It's like we can't be resting on the historical accomplishments, back in high school when I did some great thing. Well, we've sort of moved on. And how far back can we go? The last moment. Imagine, a road trip. If I leave California and I'm driving to Boston and I make it all the way to Oklahoma and I rest for the night, I get up in the morning, I don't say, wow, look how far I've come. And I'm all the way, okay, that's yesterday's accomplishment is today's starting point. And we need to move forward. It's true in our interpersonal relationships, it's true financially, and here in our relationship with Hashem. So the Alter Rebbe now has introduced that the tzaddik can be a non-server of Hashem. Now, again, one of the things that sort of, irritated people about Tanya is from a certain perspective, the Beinoni, as the Alter Rebbe defines it, who is constantly engaged in the struggle to do more than yesterday, can, from a certain perspective, be at a greater level than the tzaddik who has no struggle, who has completely numbed or even transformed his nefesh habahamis. But again, that's why the tzaddik needs to emulate the Beinoni in this sense of never ending and never being content. Like we say, the Rebbe is always happy but never satisfied. He who has 100 should want 200. In material things, we want to be satisfied with what we have. In spiritual things, we always want to be endlessly growing. So here the Alter Rebbe continues. It's in chapter 15. We're about a third of the way down. It's the chitas for the first day of Shvat. Even within the Beinoni, yesh gam ken shtei madregas. There are two levels. So here we thought, how am I ever going to be a Beinoni? And now we're telling you, Beinoni, that's just the beginning. That's just the start. Now, again, I've shared with you that in chapter 19, the Alter Rebbe, quote, lets it slip that even Beinoni is really only an aspiration. Halavai Beinoni. We don't actually expect Beinoni. We aspire to Beinoni. So even within the Beinoni, there can be two levels. Oived Elokim, one who is engaged in the service of God, Vasher loy avdu, and one who is not serving God. Now, again, here we run into a common dichotomy. When a person is engaged in some pursuit of Torah, so, whether it's they're learning how to be a scribe or how to read Torah or how to, I don't know, blow the shofar and so on, So at what point do we say, you know what, this is not your thing? You've been at it for a couple of years. It's not your thing. It's time to move on. It could be true in any profession. How does a person know whether they should drop out of medical school or they should stick to it? We all love the story of the person who was given up on and they stuck to it with all their gusto. And then what do you know? They made it. But then there are people who stick to it and stick to it, and it's not their thing, and they're trying to force themselves into something they are not. Well, the answer to that is it a mitzvah or not? Meaning it's not a mitzvah to be a scribe. It's not a mitzvah. I mean, it's not an obligation to be a scribe, and so on. So here the Alter Rebbe makes this point that in the Beinoni, there can be somebody who's no longer growing. They have reached a certain definitive level. And in part, it's either because naturally or through their learned behavior, those things just are not interesting to them. They don't want fancy things. They're not into fancy jewelry and cars and fame and fortune. So they like studying. They're kind of an academic person. So Torah matches with them. But then we run the risk of God serving me. I love Torah because of how it satisfies my desires, how it matches with my personality. And we are here to be in the service of Hashem. So do we pursue things that we're, quote, not that good at? Because we say, well, that's my challenge. That's the thing I have to do. That's my growth point. So that's what I'm saying. It's a difficult analysis to make. When do I stick to it? Because the fact that it's difficult is an indication that this is where my neshama has to be. Or when do I say the fact that it's difficult is an indication that this is not my mission in life? It's a very tough one. So the Alter Rebbe says, Valful Pikain, so this Beinoni, even though he's not serving Hashem, ain't a Russia, he's not a Russia. He would never, in all of his days as a Beinoni, do any form of sin. And remember, as we defined back in chapter 10, that a Rasha is somebody who would, in fact, sin, even if it's a, quote, light sin. And again, how do we measure what's a light sin? And this is a discussion for another time. Or it's a sin that's not done with its full-on engagement and enthusiasm. It's just sort of haphazard and absent-minded. But even that, the Abeinoni would not do. So why is he not an Oived? Because, again, he's leveled off. He's found his level, he's found his place, and he's leveled off. Now, we know this because in life, we have a tendency to get bored. And that's not innately a bad thing. An animal will sit in the cage because all it does is look for food. And if it's in the zoo and its handler is going to bring it food every day, it's perfectly content to just sit and do nothing. But a human being is not designed to sit and do nothing. So when we find ourselves in such a circumstance with, quote, nothing to do, we become frustrated and irritated. Now, that's not innately a bad thing. It's all about what we do with it. So our nefesh elokis can have the same. Now, sometimes, and again, we've probably all observed this somewhere, hopefully not within ourselves, that we could start to say, well, I've done this and now I'm bored and I'm going to therefore go and look for an adventure, not always in a holy and godly way. That's why there has to be endless growth in our service of Hashem. We see from the Rebbe, I did this great thing, good, now go do 3 great things. It's not a punishment, it's not a reprimand, because it's going to go somewhere. Either we're going to find that expansion of self in holiness, or we're going to find it somewhere else, because in a not necessarily bad way, we are like addicted to the thrill of transformation. And that's not a bad thing. I mean, I'm maybe portraying it in a little bit of a shallow manner because we are dynamic entities designed for growth and not for sitting around doing nothing all day. Unfortunately, we can be numbed into that, but that's not what we are seeking. We are seeking transformation of self. V'gam kaim kol ha-mitzvahs she'efsoi l'kaiman v'talmud Torah keneged kulam v'lei pasuk pumi migirsa. And this Beinoni, who is not an Eved, he's not an Oved, he's not somebody actively engaged. He loves to do mitzvahs, and he does every mitzvah, including the mitzvah of Torah study. Why do we point that out specifically? Because Torah study is 24 hours a day. So it's you say, well, he does every mitzvah. Sure, he shook the lulav. That took a moment. He put on tefillin. That took a few moments. He studied some Torah. So, but now I'm done. Like, what do I got to do? And then I don't have to do any more. What do I got to do? And I'm not going to get yelled at. Now, again, we all could probably know somebody, if not within ourselves, whose life is driven by job, just over broke. What's the least amount I got to do and I won't get fired? What's the least amount I could pay this guy and he won't quit? And we wind up in this endless negotiation of what can I get away with? What's the least amount I can do? How can I scam the system and get away with it? And their proudest achievement is how little they did and yet how much reward they got. You know, the sort of stereotype of the family reunion and everybody is bringing something. Well, what I'll bring the least onerous item. I still get to come and I can take advantage of people's kindness because they're not going to kick me out. Well, I think they might kick me out. Okay, next time I'll do just enough so they don't kick me out. So yeah, we can go along in life with what's the least amount I got to do and I won't get yelled at. What's the least amount I got to do and people will still include me in their games? What's the least amount I can do and I can still share with and I can still share in the abundance of others. But that's not why we're here. We're not here for, well, it's better than nothing. Right. It's not a competition except with myself to say, where am I in contrast to where I was yesterday or 5 minutes ago? It doesn't mean I'm in a bad place. But if I'm just doing what I've always been doing and there's no growth, like stagnant water, it winds up getting contaminated. Whereas rushing water is always going to be fresh. And that's what we need to be. We need to be continuously engaged in the endless pursuit. Nobody just wants to be here by next week, right? No business says our greatest aspiration is in 50 years, we should be right where we are. Now, it's true that some businesses go out of business in 50 years. And we certainly don't want that. But again, we're not here for, well, it's better than nothing. That's not a very inspiring message to say my greatest aspiration is to just be right where I am. So the Alter Rebbe continues. Ella she'enu oisa shu milchama im hayetzar lenatzchai al yidei or Hashem hameir al nefesh alakis shebemayach hasholat al alev kanal. What then is the quote flaw of this Beinoni? Meaning we just spent basically the first 14 chapters, merely the last 3 chapters, talking about this quality of the Beinoni. And let's imagine the guy even gets to the level of Beinoni. But remember, what is it that prompted the Alter Rebbe to write Tanya? Is people who came to him and said, I'm not feeling it. Now, again, the original audience of the Alter Rebbe, for sure, is still people who are doing mitzvahs. Meaning, if somebody comes and he says, I really want to be close to Hashem, what should I do? The first thing we tell him to do is mitzvahs. So the person who's come to the Alter Rebbe for this yichidus that prompted the Alter Rebbe to write Tanya is doing mitzvahs. He's keeping kosher. He's making brachas. He's putting on tefillin every day. That's not his issue. What's his issue? He's not feeling it. So the Alter Rebbe says, why? Because he is not engaged in battle. Now, it was curiously just the parsha yesterday, Kitzeitze L'Mochama, we go out to battle. Now, again, we're not talking about violence here, of course, but there is a battle with our Nefesh HaBahamis. And one of the core messages of Tanya is that ultimately our Nefesh HaBahamis, although it can get along with our Nefesh Elokis, because remember, the Nefesh HaBahamis does not want evil, it just wants pleasure. It's just interested in, is this going to be something that's going to benefit me? Now, the Yetzer Hara wants evil. So a simple illustration is, if I offer the Nefesh HaBahamis 2 identical pieces of food, one is kosher and one is not kosher, the the Nefesh HaBahamis is perfectly prefer to have the kosher one because it tastes just as good and I don't have to feel badly. The Yetzer Hara, as we say, dafka, deliberately, particularly, intensely wants the non-kosher one. That's what it wants. It wants to do evil. The Nefesh HaBahamis is driven by the pursuit of pleasure, the Yetzer Hara by the pursuit of that which is bad. So we might say, okay, I resisted it, I resisted it. And again, if we read about in the previous three chapters with the Beinoni, or we might think that the Alter Rebbe is saying, and a little bit this is true, tough. You may go through your whole life always wishing you could indulge in some behavior. You're always going to want to do it. It's always going to be a struggle, but, tough. Again, and there's some truth to that certain things are just tough. That's life. You got to deal with it. Life outside the Garden of Eden is a conglomerate of one thing after another. And a little bit, that's true. You recall that in the previous chapter, the Alter Rebbe recommended, insisted, suggested the exercise of trying to make these temptations disgusting in your eyes. Remember, we talked about, where does every food that a person, I can't live without it, where does it wind up a few hours after he eats it? I mean, to be, gross, it winds up in the sewer system. Where does every indulgence wind up? So these are exercise. Oh, I can't live without. I have to have this. It's irresistible. Well, if I just imagine what it's going to look like in a couple of hours, or to be, somebody once pointed out, if I offered you a donut or a matzah, you take the donut every time. But if I offered you a 3-day-old donut and a 3-day-old matzah, you take the matzah every time. So that's a beautiful illustration for the eternality of Kedusha versus the temporality of indulgence. So not only does the Alter Rebbe say, hey, here's a trick for you. The Alter Rebbe here is saying we have to do this. It's quote, and it sounds almost ridiculous. It's not enough to just be perfect. It's not enough to just always do the right thing in thought, speech, and action. You have to engage in battle. Now, for two reasons. One is it's simply the likelihood. If a person has only got limited strength, and if every day they are constantly resisting, there might very easily come a time when I'm not going to be able to resist because it'll just wear me down. It's like I've shared this before, this beautiful comic I saw. I wish I would have saved all these little things. These two kids are in the shopping basket with their mother in the grocery store. Can we have chocolate? No. Next panel. Can we have chocolate? No. Next panel. Can we have chocolate? No. Next panel. Can we have chocolate? I'll think about it. Next panel. Can we have chocolate? Quiet. She said yes already. Once you've capitulated the tiniest bit, that's it. You're in. So that's one reason why we have to engage in this battle to not only resist the temptation, but to eliminate the temptation, because otherwise it may come to fruition. That's A. B, another reason is because that is truly the illustration of our love for Hashem. We know that God doesn't like 365 things. So whatever it is, fill in the blank where a person may have some temptation. If internally he's always desiring that other thing, even though he doesn't do it, it does at least subtly damage his relationship with Hashem. Because Hashem, I never did it, and I know you don't like it, but I still really like it. Meaning, the more our strategy for repulsion of Avera is, I love Hashem so much that anything that would get in my way of loving Hashem is going to be disgusting to me. Not because I don't like it, but because it gets in the way of my relationship with Hashem. So there's nothing wrong with it. It just gets in the way. And a simple example that we're all familiar with is chametz. I eat chametz. Comes Pesach, all of a sudden I don't eat chametz. What's changed? It's just as delicious as it was the day before. Answer, because I love Hashem so much that now it will get in the way. Now that will disrupt my love for Hashem. Whereas If I'm just a regular day, it doesn't get in the way of my relationship with Hashem. So what is the strategy? Okay, so how do I do this? So the Alter Rebbe says, Al Yidei or Hashem or Never Sholakis. What is the mechanism to diminish, not just to resist, but to diminish the temptation? I have to access the divine light. Because one of my favorite expressions, no thing can stand up against the nothing of Hashem. So if you're going to say, well, isn't pork good? Yeah, but kosher is better. Isn't sleeping late good? Yeah, but going to shul is better. At some point, it's just a competition. And a competition, even if I win, I lose because I have conceded that it's debatable. And so even winning, I lose. What's the alternative? Not that I say, oh, well, Shabbos is better than playing golf on Saturday. That Torah study is better than watching TV, even though we believe we can win that argument. That's not a eternal argument, because tomorrow I'll come up with yeah, but now I got a better thing. Now this is going to be more interesting. It's not giving up just because you defeated it on the first try. And what is our access point to this infinity of Hashem? As we said, Hashem stands at the right side of the destitute one to help him out from the judges of his soul. How can you help a brother out? How can we get help from Hashem? Answer, the access point is our capacity for thought. Again, not how many pages of the Torah we've studied, simply our ability to imagine that there's something other than me and other than what's staring me in the face. And remember the distinctive human capacity to look up and see the infinite versus an animal who's on all fours and only sees the patch of ground before him. Who is wise? He who sees the outcome of his behavior. That is, we can see beyond just what's staring me in the face. And that characteristic of Moach, again, expanse, imagination, creativity, all of those good words. And again, it's not just about downloading data, because nobody knows more than Google, and it has no ethics to it. And some might argue that AI is innately immoral because it's made by people who are driven purely by self-interest. It doesn't have a godly quality. And we would take that position that without the godly quality, everything is driven by some derivative of what's in it for me. Doesn't mean I want to steal your lunch, but I'm only driven by what's in it for me. So the access point is to get beyond myself and see the infinite of Hashem. And that is via the moyach. Again, not the brain in the sense of data, because nothing knows more than Google, like I said. So, what's this person's circumstance? We have a guy who doesn't have a Yetzer Hara against Torah study. He loves to learn. That's his nature. He's an academic. He loves to learn. Now, it's true. And again, the animal soul always makes the excuse, well, it's better than any that, right? But we're not here for better than. The Alter Rebbe did not go to jail for 53 days for, well, it's better than nothing. It's true, but we're not here to live our lives. And remember, as we have pointed out from the very beginning, if my greatest aspiration is to make sure I go in the up elevator, not the down elevator, Tanya's probably not going to be very satisfying. But if my ultimate purpose is to be in a vibrant, meaningful relationship with Hashem, not just to what do I got to do when I won't get kicked out, what do I got to do when I'll still get invited to the family reunion, what do I got to do when my boss won't fire me, my children will still talk to me. If I have a minimalist aspiration, I don't need Tanya. So here we have a person, he loves to study. That's his nature. He's academic. I love it. It's great. I'm not interested in fancy things and cars and jewelry and money. And I'm not interested. I'm perfectly content to isolate myself in the library and study. Al Yidei Taburas Habida Shcheira. That's just his character. This is a phrase called Meira Shcheira. It's actually somewhat of an interesting discussion, a little beyond the scope here, but it has to do with biochemistry. That his bile is black, which is tied to a presumption that a person's biochemistry affects their moods and how much their physiology affects their psychology and so on. But it's generally here used and commonly used to mean he's basically down in the dumps kind of guy. He has no passion. He's not interested in fancy things. He's perfectly content to sit in the library and read all day. Perfectly content to do that. He's not interested in women. He's not interested in romantic relationships. He's perfectly content. You give him a bookcase full of books, he is perfectly content. Now, it's true. Couldn't he be using that to study history and reading about the Civil War and Rembrandt? Yes, and he's learning Torah, right? That's good. It's great. But we're not here for, well, it's better than nothing. Again, we're not here for that. We're not here for, well, he's not as bad as that guy, right? That's all true. Absolutely all true. But if that's our greatest aspiration, we're sort of missing the point. He's basically sort of a cold guy. He's not interested, like I said, in romantic relationships, material things. B'gdulas Hashem, l'hoimi binasei, ruach das, v'yiras Hashem emoichai, l'hishamish l'la'abra mitzvos le'sasei. Therefore, he does not have to so much, and that caveat is very important, think about the infinity of Hashem. And again, this is what he doesn't have to do, which will teach us that when a person has a struggle, what he does have to do. This guy doesn't struggle with that. That's not a problem. He's not interested in these things. He likes he's compliant. He likes being a good boy. He likes to study. He's not interested in wealth and material things and fancy cars. They're not interesting to him. So he does not have to engage in the thinking of the infinity of Hashem so much, and I want to emphasize that just to finish the idea here, which would then produce from his understanding a spirit that transmits to his application, das, all of this is crucial, and reverence of Hashem and his intellect to prevent him from not violating any prohibitions. I just want to finish a few lines and come back here. V'avas Hashem b'libai, and to feel love for Hashem in his heart, l'dafka, which will then prompt him to seek attachment to God, which is via b'kiyam mitzvahs Talmud Torah k'neged kulan, the fulfillment of mitzvah actions, including the study of Torah, which is Iber Alis, as we say, or it's every moment. So there's never a time when you don't have a path to be connected with Hashem. You always have a path to be connected with Hashem. Ella, rather, dailo ba'ava misuteres. He simply relies on his hidden love. We'll talk about this. We're going to come through all of these. Asher b'lev klos Yisrael, which is in the heart of every Jew. Shenikru, who are called oivei shmo, those who love his name. And therefore, Inu Nikra Ovid Klal. He's not called a server at all. We're going to come back to all of these ideas. Because this hidden love, or this packaged love, is not his doing. He is not his service. It is simply an inheritance that comes to every single Jew. So here's the deal. A person who does not have a struggle. So again, we might say, oh, that's somebody else. But everybody has some area in which they don't struggle. They're totally down with it. Whatever it is. And again, we're not here for confession. Whatever it is, everybody has an area in the service of Hashem in which they do not struggle. Why? So what makes them compliant? Because the mere fact that a Jew has a godly soul is why he loves God. Why does a child love their parent intuitively? Not because of some biochemical dispatch in the neuro endings of evolutionary development. He just does. That's it. Because he comes from his parent, and therefore he intuitively longs to be aligned with his parent. Not because of some biochemical survival instinct that's evolved through. It's it. I mean, it's the most obvious thing, which, of course, in this crazy world, we have to question. I've shared this before. It's a long story, but there was a woman. She's a somewhat famous intellectual, academic, news person, not some airhead celebrity, who had her first grandchild. And she wrote a whole book. It's called On Being Grandma, where she is shocked how much she loves this grandchild. And she cannot figure out why she's willing to give up an interview with some president or head of state to fly across country to watch her 4-year-old's dance recital. So she's going to neurophysicists and evolutionary biologists And I'm reading this book, like, this is a joke, right? You're doing an academic study that you have discovered that grandparents have an irrational love for their grandchildren. Like, right. I mean, she can't figure it out. This makes right because it's simply intuitive. You think this is a joke, right? You're putting me on. You're going to turn the page and say, "Ha, I gotcha." And this is not a stupid person, right? This is not some airhead. The point being, a child loves their parent simply because they are of the parent. Well, a Jew has a chelik elakam imal mamash. You remember from the opening line of the second chapter of Tanya. A Jew is invested with an actual spark of Hashem, an actual part of God, and therefore it intuitively loves Hashem. Now, isn't it true that it can be buried? Yes. Isn't it true that a child can forget to call his mother? And isn't it true that a child can forget that he loves his mother? But it doesn't take a lot of reminding to call them. There's a story, I may be mixing up some of the players, but when the early Zionists were campaigning for a state of Israel, they asked them, why do you need it to be there? Why can't it be in Uganda and other places? So he said to this member of parliament, he says, why do you drive every Sunday for an hour to go and visit your mother in a nursing home? There's a nursing home much closer. Go visit some other old lady. It's because this is your mother. But she's a nice old lady. Go visit that old lady. Why do you drive 2 hours to go visit that old lady? Because it's not some old lady. It's my mother. This is our land. That's why. What do you mean? Why do we want this land? Because this is our land. That's it. It's not for some explanation that I'm going to give you. This is simply our alignment. So when a Jew is connected with Hashem, of course, it's a wonderful, beautiful thing. But that's not an avodah. That's how you come out of the factory. We are intuitively embedded with this level of godliness. Now, by the Alter Rebbe telling us what this non-server of Hashem is not doing, he is concurrently telling us what we need to do in order to get outside of just doing what we always do. To get out, to disequilibrate our equilibrium, to shake it up, to get out of our comfort zone. So what he's not doing is, he is not engaging in thinking about the infinity of Hashem, which will give birth, and that's a common metaphor. The idea that a child reflects his parents, so too our character reflects our thoughts. This is essentially the message of Chabad Hasidus, that our intellect and our character are not two separate silos, that sometimes we do a little bit of this and sometimes we do a little bit of that. Or to use the example of upcoming Yontif, isn't it odd that we have the days of awe and the time of our celebration, Sukkot, in the same month? So you might think, okay, now we exercise this muscle. We did leg lifts. Now we're doing arm lifts. Two separate muscles that we have to exercise. Chassidus says, no, they're one and the same. The days of awe bring to the days of celebration, even though who could imagine the same person is at the shofar blowing at Kol Nidre, is at the Hakafis? How can you imagine that this is the same service of Hashem? They're so disparate. Well, one leads to the other. The intellect shapes the character and produces, and again, like a child, it reflects the parent, eye color, hair color, character. The offspring reflects the thought process that is composed of imagination, analysis, application. So I imagine there's something outside of myself, and I don't just get caught up in that, but I develop a true and firm grasp on the concept, and I apply it to my character. That's what this guy is not doing, and that's why he's just cruising along. He has an intuitive love for Hashem like a child has for his parent. Yeah, once in a while he forgets about it. Say, hey, did you call your mother? Oh, yeah, I guess I should call my mother. It's Mother's Day. It's Yom Kippur. Just a little bit of a spur gets me going. Does that mean that he doesn't otherwise love his mother? Of course he does. He loves his mother every day. Does he think about it? Not too often. A little bit of thinking. That's not an accomplishment. That's like being tall. It might be an advantage. It's not an accomplishment. And we're not here just to cruise along on the gifts that God gave us. We're here to take that investment and bring back more than you would get if you just stuck it in the bank at 2%. Outpace the inevitable. How do we do that? we access the infinity of Hashem through our imagination. And then we don't just get caught up in that, but we get a grasp of it. That's the level of Bina, to the point that it impacts outside of the intellectual sphere to the character. That's what Das does. And then it gets put into play, which results in doing more than simply what we always have been doing. And not just in a straight trajectory escalator, but it's got to be leaps and bounds. So the Alter Rebbe continues, so now the guy says, whoa, that's not me. You see, I study all day, but I don't really like it. I was not born that way. I used to hate school. I really worked on myself to make myself diligent in my studies. So that's not me. It's not intuitive for me. It became his second nature. He made it that way. He made himself into a student. It wasn't his intuition. But when did he do that? Well, that's 5 minutes ago. And we are very much into, again, I know this sounds very harsh, what have you done for me lately? What is the growth that you have made? And we've all been around that guy who talks about, when I was in high school, well, that's 30 years ago. It's like time to move on. And again, he's still riding on this embedded love. It's called hidden, but not hidden in the fact that you can't access it, but it comes with the packaging. It simply comes that way. It's hidden. It's there, like the commandment to love Hashem. How can God command you to love him? He can command you to do it. But how can you command someone to love? So we say, because the love is there, it's just hidden. Your mitzvah is to uncover that love. Elim Cain writes a Lilma Yesim Regilusai. What is it that he does more than what his tendency is? Now, when I taught in the girls' high school years ago, and I taught this chapter, a girl asked me a question, which is the best question I was ever asked. I don't really have a satisfying answer. I kind of have a hedgehog answer, which is, maybe this person's nature is to go beyond their nature. There are some people who find it a thrill to push themselves. So they go rock climbing, or they push themselves. Maybe that's their nature. How do we know you're going beyond your nature? So I could give some sort of half answer. Well, there is a certain threshold beyond what you like, but how do you know? Maybe you like doing what you don't like doing because of the adrenaline rush. I don't have an answer. I don't really. And I guess, in essence, that's the message. The message is, don't be judging it and say, okay, have I done more than I'm used to doing now? Because I sort of missed the point. We need to reorient our attitude. So it's not just about, well, I learned 5 minutes, I learned 6 minutes. Is that enough? Now I learned 7 minutes. Is that enough? We got to reorient our attitude to stop trying to see, okay, how much more I got to do, and then I'll have reached the level of excessive. There used to be a joke, we make fun of people from England that they're very narrow-minded, that at a wedding they once announced, we will now have unbridled dancing for 10 minutes. We'll now go, and so on. Okay, I don't have a good answer. It's a better question than I have an answer for. Now we can go back to that Gemara. Remember, the Gemara said, V'hainu mishum shemeim hayar harigilois lishnois kol perek mei apamim kedisa hasam megamara mashal mishuk shachamarim sheniskrim esa parsei bezuza ulechad asa parsei betrezuza neshu yesim regilusam. So now we go back to the Gemara that said, what is called the server of Hashem? One who does 1% more. Because in those days, the common practice, in order to transmit the Torah orally and not be forgotten, is that every lesson was reviewed 100 times. So doing it 100 times is a lot of times. That's great, but that's the standard. And our mission is to go beyond the standard. 101, just 1% more. And then we use the analogy from the donkey drivers. About 10 miles for $1, 11 miles is $2. 10% more, 100% more reward. And just to tweak it as we often do, remember the Hebrew word for donkey, chamor, is also the word for harshness. we're familiar with the word gashmias, which we translate as materialism, which is rooted in the word for rain. So it doesn't have a connotation of anything nasty or harsh. A pen is gashmias. When we use the word chumrius, which means also matter and so on, but like we would say, stubborn as a mule, it's that which doesn't want to give up its godliness. The pen is not fighting being used for godliness. You take the pen, you write a nice letter to your friend, you write down some words of Torah. The pen is all about it. Chumrius, the chamor represents the non-cooperative, the stubborn as a mule, part of my character, that aspect which is defiant for godliness, not just intuitively non-compliant, but it is actively defiant when I can push it 10% more, when I can push it to go an 11th mile. Now I have truly transformed. Now I have done real avoida. So it's not just about staying an extra 10 minutes and learning. It's about that characteristic that says, quitting time. That's it. Quitting time. Got to go out. So, the classic thing, how long should you daven for? I don't know. How long should you spend with your best friend? Okay, I've talked to you for an hour. Can I go now? Yeah, it's true. You read every word of it. Okay, I'll stay another 5 minutes. Again, I did it. But again, it's the attitude. It's the attitude. It's the attitude. Is my attitude, what do I got to do that I won't get yelled at? Or is my attitude that I want to be here? This is where I want to be. So again, imagine your friend said, look, how long I got to talk to you and you'll still be my friend? You've only been here an hour. Okay, I stayed another 5 minutes. And I did. And I stayed. And I this. Right? But it's not, the chumrius, the resistance has not really been changed. So it's a hard thing to legislate. I mean, we can't, it's like tshuva. We can legislate, you have to bring a sacrifice. We can legislate, you have to recompense the victim. We can't legislate that you feel bad. We can say, there was a holiday card once. The front of it was, for all the sins that I've committed, open it up, better luck next year. We don't want this sort of dismissive thing. Oh, well, try my, okay, but we can't legislate that you feel bad. This is what we're talking about here. Can you push the chumrius past where you were? Can you push it past where you were? And therefore, this 101st time, this 1% more, represents the entire transformation. Why? Because it's more than we have been accustomed to doing. And again, we've all been victimized by the customer service person who reads out of the manual. I can read out of the manual too. And they have nothing to offer other than the standard, right? I'm trying to explain to you that this is a difficult circumstance. Well, American Airlines policy is, can I speak to a manager? What does that mean? I want to go beyond someone who's only got their nose in the book. It's not their fault. There's a joke that many people do not know that airlines hold special airplanes in a hiding spot for customers who yell and scream at low-level employees. Like, what do you think they're going to do for you? They're going to suddenly pull a plane out and send you to Florida because you yelled and screamed at the gate agent? So we think, I'm going to go to the manager. I want to go to the infinite. I want to go outside of this. So if we're simply going to go through the routine, and that's not a bad routine. It's nothing bad. And again, the other guy isn't even doing that. He's not even studying 90 times. And 100 times is a long time, and it's really hard for me, and so on. Yes, all agreed. Now, what's the 1% more? What's that 1% more? That's what we're looking for. And again, as we know in life, if we don't flourish, we regress. $100 today is not going to be worth $100 in a year from now. That's just the nature of inflation. It just becomes worth less. Things wear out. Only Hashem is infinite. Things deteriorate just by time. They deteriorate. And if we don't push back against it, it's going to deteriorate. And this is that point. That's why he's called Oived Elokim. Mimnei, and this is how do you do it? How do we change? What's going to get us to change? What's going to get us to do more than just what we've always done? So here's the Alter Rebbe strategy, and it's one that we obviously recognize, very Chabad, of course, is not by enticing you that you're going to get a bigger piece of pie in heaven, although we believe that's true. Not because if you don't You don't know what's going to happen. Some horrible thing is going to happen. Maybe. What's our strategy? Love Hashem so much more. Now that's a hard thing. Every parent has been frustrated. If you don't clean up your room, this type of thing, we can get frustrated. Or if you do it, I'll buy you a bike. It's enticing as well. You'll go to heaven. It's enticing. What is the Alter Rebbe's strategy? What's going to get us to do more than simply what we have to do? More than what we've been doing? We have to have love for Hashem. Now, love doesn't only mean I love it so much. It's the greatest thing. It's like I love swimming. It means the desire to be associated therewith. There's a story in the Talmud about this rabbi who was studying Torah, and he was approached by his colleagues who said the Romans have outlawed the study of Torah. If you're studying Torah, they're going to catch you. They're going to execute you. So he said to them, have I ever done anything to earn a place in the world to come? So they said, well, have you ever done anything special? So he said, yes, one time I was entrusted with tzedakah money to distribute on Purim. And I accidentally mixed my own personal money together with the tzedakah money. And even though I was entitled to take back my own personal money, I distributed all the money to tzedakah. And therefore they said, well, that's the case, then yes, you are entitled to a place in the world to come. That's the story. It's a Gemara in Avodah Zarah, page 18. So we ask the question, remember how the story begins. The guy is studying Torah, and they're telling him, stop studying Torah. The Romans are going to catch you and kill you. And then he says, well, do I deserve the world to come? Because I gave a few dollars to tzedakah. Well, what's that? Because Torah study he liked doing. That wasn't against his intuitive character. So for that alone, even though it was at the threat of his very life, he could not say that he had earned a place in the world to come. What did potentially earn him a place in the world to come? That he did something that he didn't like to do. He gave away money, and that was hard for him. So what prompts you to do this is a love for Hashem. That's our strategy. How are we going to get people to do mitzvahs ourselves? By loving Hashem, not through bribery, although that can work. Not through threats, although that can work. Through loving Hashem, which is hard. Because sometimes when we love somebody, we think that we are entitled to some casualness. They know I love them. I don't have to fill in the blank. So here the Alter Rebbe says, how do we stir up this love? So, okay, I love Hashem. How do I stir that up? So the Alter Rebbe gives us a strategy. This is the strategy of Chabad. This is it. What is always within his control? I can't control what I like. I can't control what I get excited about. What I can always control is what I willfully think about. And my mind is always able to contemplate the infinity of Hashem. Talk about, people who survive the most horrific of circumstances. They can leave with their mind. They can think about the infinity of Hashem. That cannot be taken from them. And from the intellect, it goes to the character. When it goes to the character, it can push back against the left side of the heart, even though it's raging with blood, which means concern for my biological self. Love is selfless. A parent experiences it with the child with the parent. It's not something rational, but it can get buried under the layers and layers of kids who scribble on the walls or all kinds of other distractions. We don't have to create it. We do have to rediscover it. And this is considered, look what the Alter Rebbe says here, a sort of rare compliment. This is considered perfect service for the Beni. It's perfect. If he will engage his intellect and he will think about the love he has for Hashem, and this will prompt him to do one step more. Now, isn't it true? Hey, wouldn't you really like to eat donuts instead? Yes. Wouldn't you really rather sleep late? Yes. Wouldn't you really rather sit and daydream about nonsense? Yes. So he's not a tzaddik. He has not uprooted this from his character. It's still present in his identity. Yet the fact that he has engaged his intellect to reach an infinite expanse, to stir his heart, to do 1% more, the Alter Rebbe describes this as perfect. It's perfect. Or another way, to stir up his heart. Now, in chapter 18, not so far along, the Alter Rebbe will introduce the short long way. We're about the long short way. What's the short long way? It's one we experience. It's a way, it's a form. It's not ideal, but it's not without merit. The short long way is stimulate your nefesh elokis by some jolt of enthusiasm, whether it's singing, whether it's going to a spiritual place, whether it's intense davening. The challenge there is when you leave, it wears off. Yeah, that was yesterday, that was 5 minutes ago, but it's not an invalid form of the service of Hashem. It's a jolt that gets you going. Hopefully it stays with you. We're coming up to a month that we try to pack in all of this Kedusha, and then we hold on to it so that when, in a dark, cold night in 3 months from now, and I'm not feeling it, I remember that feeling I had on Yom Kippur, on Sukkot, and Simchas Torah. I get back into it. And that will dominate the Teva Shebachol Asmali. Shazu Nikra Gam Kein Avodah. That's also an Avodah. Yes, it can wear off, just like any joyous thing. You hear a funny joke, you laugh, eventually you stop laughing. It wears off. But there's still a remnant of it, and it can sustain you. It's a short term, and it's a stopgap, but it's not unimportant. It's like a field triage until you can get to the hospital. Again, you stimulate, you get that natural love of Hashem. So the person comes and says, I don't know, I just loved it. It was so nice. I love the singing. I love the davening. I love the camaraderie, and so on. Yes, it's true that once I walk out, I get hit in the face again with the materialism, but in a little bit, it gets going. So either we engage in what we ultimately describe as the long short way, which is we open up our intellect to something outside of ourselves, or we engage in what we're going to describe later as the short long way. We kickstart our emotion, we get it going. Either way, we result in, or we engage in, the battle with our nefesh habahamis that will get us over the top. It'll get us beyond our routine. If there's no battle, if we just resign ourselves that this is the way it's going to be, again, not only will it maybe not always be that way because the other guy hasn't given up, the enemy hasn't given up, and he may keep creeping in. And again, Hashem doesn't invest in neshama just to get it back the way it was. It's an exercise in futility. He's investing the neshama in this world at risk that it be damaged with hopes and aspirations that it produce more than what it could get if it just put it in the bank. It's that atmei nikras avodas klal. If he is not engaged in the milchama, if he's not engaged in battling with himself, that is not his form of service. So again, the two mechanisms for engaging in this service are we open up the intellect to the infinite, or we pound right at the character. Again, whether it's singing or dancing or whatever it is, a person goes to a place of holiness, they associate in places of holiness with people of holiness, whatever it is that gets it going. The crucial part is don't rest on your accomplishments. What you did yesterday is wonderful, fantastic. It was a real struggle. Do not say, I worked hard, I'm taking the rest of the day off. On the contrary, I worked hard so that tomorrow I'm going to work harder, which is the absolute antithesis of the animal soul. The animal soul says, what I did yesterday buys me indulgence for today. And what the godly soul says is, what I did yesterday merits me obligation for tomorrow. I can do more tomorrow than I did today. Okay, we'll stop here.